Sunday night, football night this week. MetLife Stadium, Cowboys take on the Giants. Thanksgiving night, it'll be the Seahawks 49ers on NBC. Bob Costas with us. He's getting ready to go interview Odell Beckham Jr. of the Giants. And so no Eli Manning this week, huh?
No Eli. We interviewed Eli earlier in the season.
It never ceases to amaze me, Bob. Usually at this time of the year, no matter what year, we're saying Tom Coughlin's future and is Eli Manning an elite quarterback? Here we are again. Tom Coughlin's future and Eli Manning's place in the pantheon of quarterbacks.
But just often enough, they get on a roll off of 9-7, and they win a Super Bowl. So that's bought each of them a whole lot of goodwill and a whole lot of time.
Playing in New York, I know you being a big Mickey Mantle fan, but certain times, like Joe Namath, I always thought Lenny Dawson was a better quarterback than Joe Namath.
He was.
But not in how he's recognized. So
Right.
Joe did it in New York, won maybe the first or second most important game in NFL history, did it with style, flair.
And then Dawson won the next year, the very next year, over the Vikings.
Yes. But I just the importance of playing in New York to help Eli Manning to be a Hall of Famer, I think can you measure it?
It helps. Had Phil Simms been healthy for the second Super Bowl win, and assuming the Giants had won that game with him at quarterback, over the Bills, as they did win the game. Then he's got two.
I think he's a Hall of Famer.
Then he gets in the Hall of Fame, probably.
And he's a broadcaster as well, so I think that helps. You're still in the spotlight there. Yeah. But playing in New York, we always hear this with Jeter. Well, if Jeter played in Kansas City, but he was at the right place, right time.
Yeah. I think with Jeter, there were some haters and some people who wanted to tear him down because they thought that all the hearts and flowers was a bit too much, and I understand that. And my only criticism of Derek, whom I like very much personally, at least to the extent that you can get to know Derek, because there's always a little bit of a guard up there, but I respect the way he's carried himself, and he's always been gracious when I've been around him. The only objection I have is the commercializing of it. These guys are zillionaires. You don't have to sell every pair of socks or
dirt.
Literally, when the game was over, and I was lucky enough to do the last stadium game for MLB Network. And it really was a wonderful moment. It was a perfect moment that you couldn't possibly have scripted. A charmed baseball life ends in a perfect way. And now as we're doing a wrap-up, I'm sitting there with Jim Cott, and I see out of the corner of my eye, they're literally scooping dirt from around shortstop into buckets. And the producer's saying, going to take a shot of this. And I'm going, because if he does, I'm going to have to acknowledge what it is. And that's going to kind of deflate the moment. I would have if he had taken the shot. He didn't take the shot. But that's my only criticism of Derek. But to answer your larger question, it's this. If he had exactly the same performance with the Kansas City Royals over the course of his career, obviously it wouldn't have been as big because it isn't in New York. But also the key thing isn't just New York. It's that they were winning.
Yeah.
I mean, think of Don Mattingly in the era immediately preceding. Don Mattingly was at one time for 2 or 3 years probably the best all-around player in baseball.
Yeah.
He's done because of injuries by the time he's 34. But his teams never made it to the World Series. So he doesn't have all these moments that are locked, not just in New York fans' minds, but in every fan's mind. Plus, when Jeter comes along, now we're in a media explosion. So everything, the dive into the stands, the flip play, the Mr. November home run, every fan in Tacoma has seen that 100 times. And I think it's that, not just the total hits, the lifetime batting average, whatever it is. It's all those moments, plus the way he carried himself, plus the stage of New York and the Yankee pinstripes. It isn't just New York. It's now he takes his place somewhere with Ruth and Gehrig and DiMaggio and Mantle. So he's part of that line. All that elevates it.
You do halftime commentaries, or at least you have, where it's kind of been a little bit more than just the game itself. How personally do you take it when you get the criticism here that you're talking about the Redskins nickname, or you're talking about guns, or whatever it might be? I mean, they hit back, they swing back pretty hard.
Yeah, and some of the swing back is over the top and it's vitriolic, and some of it is just not true. I don't have any problem with a disagreement based on the merits of the argument, but ad hominem attacks or falsehoods are a different thing. As Daniel Patrick Moynihan, bring in politics again, Bob, once famously but insightfully said, everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. So when I read or hear Bob Costas regularly talks about politics, regularly uses his halftime pulpit. This is not a matter of opinion. This is a matter of mathematics. I've done dozens and dozens, maybe close to 100 over time of these. Basically, two, two were perceived as political. So I don't do it frequently, all right? If you count saying something about Vladimir Putin when the games are in Russia and it's relevant, if you count saying something about the 40th anniversary of the Munich massacre when the Israelis come in 2012 and the IOC won't recognize it, even if you count those areas where I'm more willing to go than most sports broadcasters are, if you add it up, it comprises a tiny, tiny fraction of 1% of my total body of work. So to say that I'm constantly doing this, whether you agree with it or not, is bullshit.
But should we do more of this?
You know what I think would be best is if we had more places to do it thoroughly. The kind of program I used to do on HBO that Bryant Gumbel still does with Real Sports, the kind of program we did for a while on the NBC Sports Network, and now we don't do it anymore, where you can flesh these things out. What the halftime essays are almost always about is some either humorous or quirky or appreciative observation about the league. The last two Sundays were, hey, if you've never been to Lambeau Field, here's why you have to be to Lambeau Field and why it's different from almost every other football stadium. And then last Sunday was, you know what? Chuck Pagano being ill opened the door. Thank God he's well again and on the sideline. Opened the door for Bruce Arians, who'd been cast aside by the Steelers. And now look, Bruce Arians is the toast of Arizona. That's just an appreciative football thing. That's 99% of what I do.
But do you get bored, though, with just regular? I always feel like you've seen it all, done it all, but then there's a part of you that says, I want my voice to resonate to something a lot larger than just, hey, go to Lambeau if you get a chance and it's on your bucket list.
Yeah, in the right time and the right place, yes. And here's what I'd say about the two that really caused a ruckus. How anyone could say that a halftime commentary, not an interruption of the sacred game, a halftime commentary about the name of a team that's playing on NBC that night, which has become such an issue that the president has talked about it. Eventually, Goodell will have to deal with it. Snyder will deal with it. If this is not a sports issue, who do you want to talk about this? You want Lou Dobbs to come talk about it? This is a sports issue. It's a football issue. It's halftime. I do a measured commentary, which, contrary to the reaction, went out of its way to say, look, we're not saying anybody's a racist. We're not saying anybody means harm here. We're not saying it's as important to Native Americans as jobs or health care or whatever the case may be. But it's a football issue for the moment. And take a step back and consider how Redskins is different from Braves, Chiefs, or Warriors. If you want to disagree with me, fine. If you want to say I was motivated by political correctness, then how does that account for Charles Krauthammer, the brilliant conservative? How does that account for Tom Cole, a Republican senator from Oklahoma, happens to be a Native American? How does that account for Phil Mushnick here in New York, who often writes about social issues and is perceived as conservative? How does that account for Kathleen Parker, who's more or less to the right of center? I'm not motivated by political correctness. I think political correctness is stupid. I think in this particular case, there's a distinction to be made. So that would be my argument.
But there was also gun control.
Yeah. And that really wasn't about gun control.
Exactly.
It was about a culture of irresponsible attitudes toward guns among people in general, but in this case, athletes in particular.
Did you get threats after that?
I didn't get any threats
You did not.
that I'm aware of. The first place I spoke was on your show the next day. And I said what I still believe, that although I don't regret addressing the issue, I didn't take into account the dynamics. I had even less time than I usually have. Usually I have 2 minutes. I had about a minute there. And in my head, what I wanted to say was, look, there's a number of things here that we need to talk about at length, including domestic violence and are those who play a violent game more inclined toward it than their peers. The effects of football. We already know the long-term effects. There's evidence that in the short term, impulse control and aggression can be affected by head trauma, especially if mixed with alcohol or painkillers or performance-enhancing drugs. And then third, there's the whole question of athletes and guns. And I wish I had said, not talking here about anyone's responsible, lawful exercise of their legitimate Second Amendment rights. But, okay, and we all know, if we were to sit here and just kind of scroll the list of athletes who have had tragedies or criminality or folly as a result of their association with guns, and then say, and now as a counterpoint, here's all the times when an athlete had a gun and heroically, like Wyatt Earp, turned a dangerous situation around for the better, the first thing you'd need your whole show. The second thing would be over in a nanosecond. Why is it not possible for people to say, so again, I wish I had done a more thorough job of explaining where I was coming from. But in truth, for those who are extreme on this and angry, it really doesn't matter, Dan, because I clarified it just the way I have with you here in a dozen different places, including going on Fox News to do it, because I figured I might as well go in the Lion's Den. I did it with Bill O'Reilly, who's always been fair to me. I did it with Howard Kurtz. It doesn't matter what you really believe. You can defend a position you actually hold. You can't defend a position someone assigns to you to set up a straw man so it moves the needle for them and they can make whatever argument they want to make.
Well, it's always interesting that, it's fine to have an opinion as long as your opinion agrees with their opinion.
Right.
Then they're fine with it. We'll take a break. We'll close up here this hour with Bob Costas, who's kind enough to can you come back for a couple of minutes here?
Of course I can.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
Yeah.
I know, Al did 3 segments. I didn't know if you wanted to do 3 segments because Al did 3 segments.
No, in that case, I want to do 4.
4. Fine. Yeah, you can do the next hour and 15 minutes.
And if Nance comes in and does 5, I'm doing 6.
I want to ask you about competition with other broadcasters. I want to ask you about this.
Okay.
If there truly is competition, any kind of envy on your part. We'll continue with Bob Costas next.